All right, Shannon, what do you think? Are you ready to go?
Yep.
All right. All right, excellent. Well, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Welcome to our virtual green breakfast. We're very excited to have Mr. Shannon Curtis with the Fairfax County Stormwater Planning Division joining us today to share much of the great work that they have going on over there in terms of monitoring and assessing our watersheds. Just before we get started, I am continuing to admit folks from the lobby, so please bear with me and welcome to everyone. I just wanted to share a few quick ground rules. Please do make sure that your microphone is muted throughout the course of our presentation this morning. And if you're having trouble, you may need to turn off your video just to ensure that you have ample bandwidth to be able to follow along and see the transition of slides and all. If you are having other issues with audio or video settings, please feel free to send me a message. I am the host of this meeting, and you can send me a message and I will send you information on how to perhaps call into our program today. And if you do have a question or you have an event that you would like to share, you may absolutely do that through the chat box feature. I will be collecting the questions as they come in, and we will have time at the end of today's program to go through your various questions. The announcements that you may have, please do feel free to share your announcements as well as any websites that you would like to direct folks to. We will be capturing the chat, and I'll try to get that out to folks as well after today's program. But again, we're very, very happy that you're here. Let me see. The Green Breakfast is being recorded. We started the recording just a few moments ago, so if your video is on, it is likely going to be included in the recording, so just be aware of that. We are going to be posting it to YouTube, our Facebook page, as well as the district's website, probably within the next week or so. We do anticipate that our presentation will go till about 10 o'clock this morning, and then we'll have about 15 to 30 minutes for questions at the end as well. So I appreciate the registration feature was a new thing we tried out this time around. I realize there's a special button you need to push in order to be able to allow people to just automatically register and approve those registrations. So if you had a little trouble, I appreciate your patience in terms of any challenges that may have caused. But let's continue to be patient with one another, be respectful within our forum, and we're really going to have some fun. This is a great presentation and some great information. I want to also thank the Great Falls group of the Sierra Club for donating 2 of their beautiful 2021 calendars as door prizes for today's event. I am going to actually post a link to a Microsoft form in the chat box, and all you need to do is put in your name and your email address, and then we will do a random drawing for the 2 calendars. So if you're interested in providing that, please, again, we'll make sure that we put that link in the chat box, and you can be eligible for the drawing. So thanks again to the Great Falls group for their generous donation. And with that, we are going to get our program underway here. And it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Shannon Curtis, who is the Watershed Assessments Branch Chief with the Fairfax County Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. And Shannon and I go back a long way. He joined Fairfax County Stormwater Planning Division in 1999. And since then, he has supported the development of the first stream protection strategy in Fairfax County. He has supported the development of the perennial streams identification methodology, stream physical assessments and watershed plans. And today he leads the group and the section within stormwater planning that continues to collect and interpret the biological, chemical, and physical characteristics of our streams and our watersheds in order to not only track trends, but understand those conditions and help to inform some decision making as well. In my opinion, there are very few people in Fairfax County that know our streams better than Shannon. And just to let you know, Shannon's the one in the middle. He's not one of the two fish on either side. But kudos to those who can identify what kind of fish those are. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, who's going to share a little bit more about himself, his team, and the impressive work that they do on behalf of all of us. So Shannon, give me 1 second and I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Can you get a thumbs up, Laura? You hear me all right?
All right.
Okay. There's a little bit of a strange feedback that's going on. So I'm going to try to turn my volume down, I guess, because...
Shannon, let me see if everyone can make sure that they are recorded. I'm sorry, that they are muted. I may end up muting everyone here. Let me see. I'm going to mute all.
I think it stopped. That helped. There was a whole bunch of feedback loops going on, so it's much, I can actually hear myself think now, so perfect.
That happens. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and I'll begin the presentation here. See if we can get this going. Okay. Give me 1 second to get, everybody just went into a tiny little window, but can everybody see my screen? Laura,
Yes.
is that a good? Okay. So thank you, Laura, for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk about this stuff. I'm very passionate and I get jazzed about this stuff. I really enjoy it. It's my passion. And I appreciate all of you guys spending your Saturday morning listening to me ramble on about our streams and all the cool stuff that we've been doing in the streams over the past, well, quite frankly, over the last 50 to 70 years, quite honestly. I'm at a disadvantage right now because I really enjoy presenting in front of live audiences. I get to interact with the audience. I get to ask you questions. I get to stop and answer your questions. I can gauge how I'm doing and how people are getting, how people are, being engaged by what I'm telling you.
Tell us something.
What's that? Someone say something? Okay, so I apologize if my presentation is a little flat. I haven't done a presentation for a large group virtually yet. Believe it or not, I made it the whole year without having to do a virtual big presentation, group presentation. So I will try to keep it kind of light and engaging, although it's kind of hard to interact with everyone when they're muted and have to listen to me talk the whole time. So I'll try to keep it engaging and not just talk at you guys for 45 minutes to an hour. And really, I think the really engaging and entertaining part is going to be at the end when you guys start asking me questions and we start having dialogues about some of the information I've gone over. So I look forward to that part more than I do just giving information to you for the next 40 minutes or so. So with that, and my slides are not advancing. There we go. So just real quickly, in by way of overview, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit, kind of talk about what I do, what my group does, just so you get some context. I'm also going to talk about Fairfax County watersheds, both kind of like their physical setting, but also kind of some of the human history, the recent natural history of these watersheds, to put it into context of what we're looking at, what we're studying, and what we're trying to manage. I'm going to go over kind of a history lesson of what the county has done over the past, let's say, 50 to 70 years. I found myself as I was developing this presentation. I've never given this presentation before. I've given lots of presentations, but not this particular one. So as I was developing this one over the last several weeks, I found myself continuously kind of falling back on how we got to where we are today. And the programs that we're running today are really they're a legacy of a lot of really progressive, innovative thought and leadership from decades before. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't actually kind of talk about the culminating efforts that got us to where we are today. So I am going to spend a little bit of time on kind of the history of what has been done in Fairfax County to get us to where we are today. We have a lot of water quality monitoring programs that we run. Some of them are, you know, nationally recognized and some of the best in the country, if not the world. I'm going to kind of talk about just some of the larger ones because it would take me, I could spend a long time talking about all of them. So I'm going to introduce you guys to some of the larger ones and what we're finding with these studies and some of the results. And then kind of looking forward, what does this mean? What is it telling us? And then what do we, looking down the road, decades to come, what do we need to still be doing? So I'll kind of forecast some of those thoughts and ideas. So a little bit about myself. I work for the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services in Fairfax County. There are, as you see on our left, is kind of our mission, vision, and values statement. And, you know, our primary core focus is to preserve a sustainable community. You know, sustainability is kind of become the key overriding principle of just about everything that communities need to be doing these days to, you know, maintain their communities. And if you look down at our vision, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but, you know, protecting our environment is a core principle, and basically everything we do pretty much revolves around our environment. We have a solid waste management group who manages the trash throughout the county. We have wastewater management who has a massive network of collection and treatment systems throughout the county. We have capital facilities who builds all of our facilities, and they're continuing to build them to higher and higher environmental standards. And all of this is to provide services for the residents, but also to protect our environment and manage it in a sensible and sustainable way. And then stormwater management is the group that I'm in, that I've been with for my career. And we manage the infrastructure that drains everybody's landscape. We manage the water quality facilities, the large major dam impoundments, and make sure those are safe. And we do a lot of water quality monitoring and implementation of restoration projects to try and improve our watersheds. And that's kind of the core of what I'm going to get into today. So I work in the stormwater planning division. I have 3 different sections that are in my group. One of them is the monitoring section that does a lot of the work you're going to see today. I also have another section called the Watershed Education and Outreach section, and they spend a large amount of their time connecting with the Fairfax County Public Schools, developing curriculum based on environmental messages and a lot of the science that we use in our job, and bringing this to kids of all ages so that they can see how they can be engaged with the environment and how they can pursue careers in the environment, and just generally be aware and learn about it. So maybe they can teach their parents and they can teach others. And we really put a lot of time and energy into educating programs that educate the youth, because we know that's really where we're going to see the most change, and that's really where our greatest hope is. And so that's our group that does the outreach and education. And then I have a third group of inspectors that enforces our stormwater management ordinance that says nothing but rain down the storm drain. So if you see somebody dumping paint or oil down the drain, that's a violation of our stormwater management ordinance, and our inspectors will sniff those things out and basically bring about compliance. They also do inspection of industrial and high-risk facilities to make sure that we don't have areas where we're continuously allowing pollutants to get into our system. So everything we do in my group is completely focused on the environment, and I work with a lot of very motivated, passionate individuals that are dedicated to the environment. So it's really encouraging to work with such a team of, you know, motivated and really passionate folks that share the same type of energy around improving our environment. So enough about me. I want to start setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today. And it's all, you know, this is the canvas that we're working with, the Fairfax County Watersheds, as most of you know, and I apologize if a lot of this is redundant for many of you, but The county has 400 square miles of land area, almost, approximately. And if we were to divide that up into drainage basins, we would have 30 major watersheds that drain of that 400 square miles. Roughly, we have about 1,000 miles of stream network, and it depends on what you consider a stream. There's a fine line there, and it's not a very clear line. When does it stop becoming a ditch or a ephemeral channel and become a stream? But generally speaking, that's a gauge of how large our network of channels and streams is about 1,000 miles, and we know that about 750, about 3/4 of those are what we call perennial, which are streams that basically support flow in them year round. And that's significant because if there's water in the channel year round, that becomes a biological support mechanism, so to speak, so that we know that this is a sensitive environmental feature in that it provides a lot of, it's habitat for biology because there is water year round. Interestingly and challengingly for us, we have 3 physiographic provinces that the county straddles, and this Neapolitan map that you see here, I don't know if how visible that is for you guys, but there are 3 what we call physiographic provinces, and this makes it really challenging for scientists like ourselves who are trying to compare stream conditions across a county. And this means we have apples, oranges, and bananas here. And then when we want to try and compare something from the Triassic Basin, let's say, to something that is in the coastal plain, we have to do a bunch of transformations to try to make a hybrid apple to compare with a hybrid apple, so to speak. So the coastal plain is basically remnants of when this area was under the ocean. It's mostly marine clays and sediments and cobble from the ocean from millions of years ago when this area was inundated. The Piedmont is kind of what your classic Central Virginia landscape is like. If you ever drive down Route 29 towards Charlottesville, it's an excellent tour of the Piedmont, where Piedmont means foot of the mountain. So you're not in the flat coastal plain where everything is kind of pancaked, but you're not up in the Blue Ridge Mountains where you're in these craggy peaks and these huge hills. The Piedmont is kind of a blending of the two, where you have these nice gentle rolling hills throughout the countryside, transitioning between the coastal plain and the Appalachian Ridge to our west. And the Piedmont is dominated by crystalline rocks and clays. And then the Triassic Basin, which is kind of an island inside of the Piedmont. It's not recognized as its own kind of large because it's not so big, but the Triassic Basin is actually the remnants of a Triassic era lake. There was a huge lake basin there. And because it is the remnants of a lake, the soils, the geology, and the biology are all different there. And because each of these 3 different areas has different soil chemistry, topography, flora and fauna, they all kind of need to be treated as unique. And that makes it challenging, like I said, for us when we're trying to do county-wide assessments. What are the stream conditions county-wide and where are they going? We've got to take into consideration these various features. So a little bit about the human history of these watersheds. And I'm sure I'm doing a disservice to putting this in such a short summary, but before European settlers got here, when the Native Americans were the only humans on the landscape, all of our stormwater was in perfect balance with itself, with the landscape. Stormwater management was conducted by forests and beavers. The trees managed the excessive rainfall. There were huge sponges that basically took most of the rainfall and put it into the groundwater. And what didn't get into the groundwater rolled over the land and was managed by beavers primarily. I mean, they were our little detention pond builders, slowed the water, it trapped any sediments, it allowed a lot of biological processes to occur. So everything was nicely in what we call dynamic equilibrium with itself. The landscape had shaped itself according to the hydrology and the rainfall regimes. When European colonization occurred and forests began to be cleared for agriculture, in the beginning it was primarily tobacco. That was the cash crop back then. As soon as you cut those trees off the landscape, you are immediately changing the fundamental hydrology of the watershed, and now you have shifted a lot more water into runoff where it was going into the groundwater. It also prevents the soil from being eroded, because once those roots are gone and we start digging up the earth and farming, we get a lot of soil erosion. And very early on in our colonization, in the colonization of this country, there really weren't informed farming practice. So what we ended up with is massive soil erosion in the uplands where the farming occurred, but then we also had massive sedimentation in the stream valleys where that soil was deposited. Moving into the 1800s, dairy farming started to become kind of the predominant agricultural practice. And then also there were dozens and dozens of mills everywhere. There was a stream valley, there was a grain mill. And so the grain that was being either brought in by train or that was being grown locally, they used the force of the water power and the gravitational force of the streams. They would dam up the streams, use the water power to crush the grain and then send the grain off to market. And what this did is, again, you have erosion occurring in the upland, you have sediment depositing in our stream valleys, but then by putting dams in the stream valleys, you're further accelerating the amount of sediment that is being trapped in those stream valleys. And so all of this is to say that what we see today in our stream valleys is not at all what you would have seen had you walked into these valleys 500 years ago. What we had in our stream valleys back then was very shallow soils. We had kind of these rocky but swampy, meandering, highly braided systems that ran through these forested lowlands. We didn't have single thread streams like you see now where there's a single channel. It was swampy, it was braided, there were beaver dams in lots of places, and the depth of soil in these stream valleys was not significant. After all of the soil deposited in the stream valleys and then forests began to grow on top of them, then we started to see an explosion in the mid-1900s with human population. And what happens is we were rapidly clearing the landscape and putting hardened surfaces, and I'm going to use this term impervious surface, and hopefully most people are familiar with that. And that is anything that we put on top of the ground that prevents water from getting into the groundwater. It could be roads, it could be houses, rooftops, it could be sidewalks, swimming pools, roadways are a big one, shopping centers. I mean, you name it, anything that hardened surface that we put on the ground continues to change the hydrology. Well, as we continue to do this to the landscape, we had to get that water off the upland so that people's houses and all of the areas where we live weren't swamped and flooded. And so stormwater management at this time, basically the paradigm was to get it off the landscape as quickly as you can. Get it out of here, get it down the hill, and then let it go. And once it gets down into that stream valley, we're done. And that continued for a very long time until we started looking down at where the outlets were, where these things came into our valleys, and realized it was wreaking havoc on the receiving systems. So this combination of putting excessive sediments in our stream valleys and then shunting lots of additional water into those stream valleys resulted in very incised channels throughout our watersheds. And when I say incised, I mean a channel, instead of being 2 feet deep, might be 8 feet deep. Very vertical banks, very unstable banks. And when it rains, now the water cannot get out into the floodplain, which is the pressure relief valve for the system. And so the water is stuck in the channel, it bangs around inside the channel, it's eroding more of the stream bank, it's taking more sediment downstream with it, and it's kind of a snowball effect of worsening conditions. And so our systems are fundamentally altered, and my perception, stream restoration is a term that's used to describe the practice of bringing streams back into some sort of functional equilibrium with their floodplains and with their environment. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that stream restoration is really a misnomer, because we are not restoring streams back to what their previous condition was. If we were going to do true stream restoration, we would rip out all of the forest of a stream valley, we would excavate millions of tons of that sediment that was placed there from upstream erosion, get down to the valley bottom, and then replant and then introduce beavers and meandering systems. So restoration is a little bit of a misnomer. I really wish we would call it stream rehabilitation, because that's really what we're doing, is we're allowing the stream to have regained function within its new environment, which are these newly formed stream valleys. So our systems are fundamentally altered. We've added more water to the landscape when it rains. We've changed the soils. We've changed topography. We've changed vegetation. So when we talk about fixing our streams, quote unquote, we're not just fixing the problems we've created since the 50s and World War II and all of this urban explosion. We're dealing with impacts from centuries of impacts, urban, agricultural. You know, there's fundamental things here that we can't just say, well, it's our fault because we didn't put impervious surface everywhere. We have to take this all into our concept of what's wrong with these streams and then how do we fix them. So that's our county today, and those are all the roads that we have in our county. And as you can see, it's a completely fragmented mosaic of a natural landscape, and it provides us with a on how manage to keep nature doing her thing and trying to reduce the impacts that we've caused by the incredible amount of people living on the landscape. So I put together this little graph just for just to kind of give you some context to what forces we're putting on our landscape. So in 1900, I think we had probably, I think it was around 20,000 people population in Fairfax County. And as you can see, we were kind of cooking right along with no real big changes until World War II. And then it's just an enormous growth in human population on the landscape. And so more and more demands would be, demanded out of the landscape in terms of receiving our runoff and providing for us. So, you know, now we're close to 1.2 million people on this same 400 square miles of landscape. And so the reason I show this is not only to kind of give you guys a good feel for just how many people have all of a sudden shown up on this land, but also right around the time 1950, 1960, 1970 occurred, you're going to start seeing in my history that people really started doing things. They knew that this was coming. They saw it. And we had some very visionary, very, you know, progressive folks that said, we need to do something about this. Otherwise, we're going to kind of go off a cliff. And so sustainability necessarily isn't that new. It's been around for a long time. And some of the programs that I'm about to go over, you're going to see that there is definitely sustainability in mind as these were developed. I really wish I could stop and let you guys ask questions, but we'll just hit that at the end. So I would be remiss again if I didn't go over some of our history, and I'll try to go through this pretty quickly, but I think it's important for a lot of you guys to see how much kind of forethought has gone in. And you know, if you think the streams are bad now, just think if we wouldn't have done some of this stuff, they would be atrocious. So there's always a flip side to the way that you look at things. And so one way is to say, wow, they're horrible, we really need to do something. The flip side is that, hey, we kept them from being absolutely horrendous by doing these particular activities. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. Kind of the first thing I could find, you know, that we really started to preserve and protect our stream valleys and our streams was the Fairfax County Floodplain Ordinance from 1959. And although this was meant to actually protect people and structures from flooding, keeping buildings out of the floodplain where it just doesn't make sense to put people and habitable residences, it served to protect those areas from impacts due to cutting the trees down and hardening the landscape. So the floodplain ordinance really was kind of the backbone of our initial stream valley protection, whether it meant to be or not. And then later, as it was updated, more and more environmental types of restrictions and considerations were written into this ordinance. All the way back in 1969, even before the Clean Water Act, the board asked the health department to start looking at water quality in the streams and saying, hey, you know, what is in these streams? And the public really kind of needs to know, walking the streams, water. Began running the annual stream water quality monitoring reports until we took them over in 2000 when stormwater planning became its own actual entity. We took the program over. And what they looked at was primarily bacteria and nutrients. And what they found was there were high levels of bacteria in the streams year in and year out. So they would issue a don't swim, don't play, don't drink if you have open cuts, keep your kids out of the water as kind of a disclaimer saying, we never know when something nasty can be in the stream. So we recommend you don't make contact with the streams, which is kind of a double-edged sword, keeps people from potentially getting infected, but it also keeps people away from their streams, which are a resource of their shared environment. So that went on for many, many years. Fairfax County was the first county in the state to establish a sediment and erosion control ordinance, which basically protected the streams and the environment from the ill effects of uncontrolled sediment from construction sites. And I believe the state actually used Fairfax County's ordinance to model their first ordinance. So Fairfax was kind of ahead of even the state back then, and it was badly needed. I think many of you who through the years, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, even 2000s, went by construction sites and saw how lax or inappropriate some of the controls were. It really, really is frustrating, and things have really come a long way since then. And they have really tightened up the rules. Now, how well those rules are applied, that's an object of debate. But you know, before the 70s, you could go out there and you could take a bulldozer and tear out as much land as you want. You didn't have to trap any of the sediment. If it went to the stream, then so be it. So Fairfax was very progressive, and they knew by looking at their population explosion that this was going to continue. So they said, we better do something about getting a handle on all the sediment, because we know the landscape's going to continue to be developed. In 1974, the Virginia Tech Occoquan Watershed Monitoring Lab was established to oversee the quality of water in our Occoquan Reservoir, which is one of our major drinking water supplies. And Virginia Tech and Fairfax County was a major partner with other regional partners in getting this up and running and coordinating on efforts to improve water quality in our drinking water reservoir. And we still continue to this day to work with them. They're an incredibly humongous resource, and as I consider them, the gold standard for monitoring in the area. And then also in the 70s, the Public Law 566 program was used in conjunction with Fairfax County and the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District got together and figured out how to leverage funds from this program to build regional lakes in the Pohick Watershed. If many of you have been through Burke, I'm sure you've seen some of the lakes like Lake Mercer, Lake Huntsman, Lake Royal, Lake Braddock, Lake Barton. All of these lakes were built in anticipation of continued development in the watershed. And so they knew that there was going to be flooding and sedimentation attendant to this development. So these lakes were built to manage that additional runoff and the sediment. And so there was a very progressive program. And so again, looking forward, knowing that we were going to have continued build out, let's do something about it. Leading up to the Clean Water Act, I guess the Cuyahoga River caught fire sometime in the early 70s, and that brought the nation's attention really hard focused on what are we doing with our aquatic resources in this country. And then, you know, the Clean Water Act followed, I think, in 72. Fairfax was, you know, in this effort, and they floated an $11 million bond referendum to pay for a complete countywide evaluation of drainage concerns, and then to develop basin master drainage plans. This is kind of an early forerunner of watershed management plans. They did environmental baseline studies to take inventory of what the environment was at the time. And at the end of all of these studies, they basically had a master plan for erosion abatement projects. And most of these were the old school, very hardened, riprap, not really nature centric, but were focused on alleviating erosion and damage from all this uncontrolled runoff, because even at this time, we still had no stormwater controls that were required for development. Another significant thing, in 1973, the Fairfax County Park Authority adopted the Stream Valley Park program, where they took a lot of these floodplain properties that were unbuildable and consolidated them into the Stream Valley Parks, which is, you know, about almost 10% of our county land area. So again, that like the floodplain ordinance, these areas became even further protected by coming into county hands and then becoming a kind of a resource for the public to go and hike and to appreciate nature and start to understand it more. So that was a huge, huge win. We established the environmental quality corridors policy, which basically identifies very sensitive areas such as stream channels when properties are coming in for rezoning applications, and to try to bargain with as part of the process to protect these areas. So we had a lot of things protected as part of that as well. In '82, we downzoned all of the residential properties draining to the Occoquan, with the exception of Centerville. And that was to protect water quality in our drinking water reservoir. That was only one after a state court lawsuit was overcome by the county, and the county was allowed to actually institute that zoning. And we see effects of that to this day, and it was a very, very good decision. And we still see the positive effects of that in our data that we collect. In '85, they said, well, let's start doing some more of these big ponds that we put in the stream valleys and start capturing some of the sediment. So they developed a regional ponds program, and that had its own set of challenges that I'm not going to get into here. But that was kind of a further progression of stormwater management. Well, we can't manage it at the site. Let's go into the stream valleys and manage it. And we learned quickly over the next decade that was not the preferable way to manage stormwater for a multitude of reasons, although it did have some beneficial effects. 1986, the wastewater treatment plant down in Lorton, called the Noman Coal wastewater treatment plant, dumps half of the county's treated wastewater into a tidal embayment called Gutson Cove. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Very early on, we worked in partnership with George Mason to develop a monitoring program that's been going on for over 30 years now, or close to 30 years now. And it is a landmark study in ecosystem recovery. It's really, really, really a great, if you ever have an opportunity to have Chris Jones from GMU come talk about his program, it's a wonderful story. And part of that story is it takes a long time after you've done the good work to see their results. And that's a really important thing that the public needs to understand, that you won't see immediate results in nature necessarily. '93, we established the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, which basically said you need to have stormwater best management practices countywide, and we also have to put protective buffers on our larger streams, which was huge. In '93, as part of the Clean Water Act, the county received its first stormwater management permit. It treated outfalls, water coming out of stormwater outfalls, as if those were point sources, say from a factory dumping pollution into a stream. So we are now regulated on the water quality coming out of our system. And that was basically the nucleus for our modern stormwater management program, because it has a multitude of requirements, and it's only grown over the past decades. In 1998, the Board of Supervisors said, Montgomery County just did this massive study to look at their streams and understand an inventory of their streams. We don't really know where our streams are good, where they're bad, why they're good, why they're bad. So they instituted a stream protection strategy program, and they chartered a study to be done on all the streams in the county or across the county and understand conditions and to ask for recommendations on how to manage them. At this point in time, this was the first time we instituted a comprehensive biological monitoring program, which was pretty significant. So that's kind of back when I joined on. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Then after that, we conducted a countywide stream physical assessment, which means we basically walked every little inch of stream and took inventory of where conditions were good and bad. In 2004, at the same time, we walked the streams and we expanded these RPAs, these resource protection areas that are buffers on our streams, to prevent encroachment on stream buffers, knowing that these vegetated stream buffers provide great ecological services in terms of reducing erosion and processing nutrients that are polluting the bay. So we expanded those from 520 to 860 miles over a 2-year period of walking and mapping these streams. So that was one of the most significant protective improvements in probably the modern times that we've done to the streams using the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. This was not just us doing this, but we probably were pushed the limits of what we were asked to do in that act more than anybody else. Once that was done, we began watershed management plans over the next 7 to 9 years, because the old plans had kind of, you know, they had aged, and a lot of the technology that was called for in the plans from the 70s was defunct. So as part of this watershed management planning process, over 1,700 structural projects or potential opportunities were identified to be considered as part of our capital program. In 2009, the president signed the Chesapeake Bay Executive Order, which basically said there will be a budget for pollutants going into the Chesapeake Bay because we need to save the bay. And so the trickle-down effect of that is that everybody that is in the 64,000 square mile Chesapeake Bay watershed would need to find ways to reduce their nitrogen, sediment, and phosphorus inputs to the bay. And that could be through stormwater improvements, that could be through wastewater improvements, that could be through agricultural improvements. So it had a very far-reaching effect. In anticipation of that, Fairfax County finally, after years and years of looking at it and trying, was able to establish a dedicated funding source for our stormwater programs. And the Stormwater Service Tax District was established. And it started off as being, I think it was 1 cent on the per $100 of assessed real estate value. And over the years, as we've ramped up the abilities and the needs of our program, we're now currently at 3 1/4 pennies per $100 of assessed real estate value. And that goes to dedicated funding for managing our stormwater infrastructure, overseeing our water quality monitoring programs, all of our dams. It's a very comprehensive program and a very sophisticated program that is supported by this dedicated funding. And much of it is dictated by regulations through the Clean Water Act that we must meet. And then once we had that funding, we were able to finally start to do something about these really badly eroded streams and systems. And so starting in 2011, I call it the age of implementation, we actually began to have the funds to actually try to start fixing things. So we were upgrading our stormwater system. We were modernizing many of the facilities we use to treat stormwater. We started doing a lot of stream restorations, and the whole point was that we needed to restore the Chesapeake Bay, but also our local stream health, because our local streams were, if we help our local streams, we're going to be helping the bay by extension. And so that's kind of always been our mantra. And then in 2014, the state came up with a new stormwater management ordinance that we quickly modeled. So the stream protection strategy, which occurred in 2018, or I'm sorry, in 1998 to 2001, we went out and we did a baseline assessment of the conditions countywide. And again, this was the first time we used biological assessments. And then they wanted us to assign priorities in management strategies to enhance watershed management, since it wasn't really occurring at the time. So I'm not able to advance my slide. There we go. What we quickly found, this chart is, it's showing on the y-axis, on the vertical axis is our index of benthic health. And if you have a 0, you're failing. And if you have 100, you're the best kid in the class. So it's very much like a 0 to 100 grading scale. And on our horizontal x-axis, you see the percent imperviousness, and that is how impervious is the drainage to that particular site. And the literature has shown this over time and time and time again, and our own data bore this out, that as you increase the imperviousness of your drainage area, you see steady declines in the aquatic health of the stream. And really, once you get to 5 or 10%, you have kind of what people are saying are irreversible impacts to the system. But yet we still have some things. We have some sites up here that are defying the curve, and they're up at 60 and 70 IBI scores, and yet they're still 15, 20, 30% imperviousness. So we really want to understand, how are these holding up? Why are these doing better than the rest that are on the red line? But nonetheless, this is all to say that preponderance of our problem has to do with our land uses. So of all the sites we looked at in the stream protection strategy program, we ranked them. And what we found is that, only about 20 to 25% of our streams could be considered excellent or good. And then roughly 75% of the streams could be classified as fair, poor, or very poor. So, 75% or 3/4 of our streams are hurting, and they would likely be considered impaired by the Clean Water Act standards and require remediation. So if the state comes in and monitors our streams, we can expect that 3 out of 4 times they're going to find a stream that they say needs to be fixed. And again, the primary driver for what we see in these streams is human land use impacts, the runoff effects of pollution and stormwater. So we established management categories across the county. We had different recommendations for each of these categories. The green areas are the areas that have been protected by down zoning, and you can see that they're higher quality, and those are areas we recommend protection. And some of the recommendations that we included in the study were continue doing stream monitoring. We wanted to keep our jobs, but we also knew that if you don't watch this stuff over time, you don't really know what's happening and if you're improving. We encouraged low impact development in some of the new innovative stormwater treatment devices that were coming down the pipe at the time. We said we wanted to see new stream protection policies in how the county does business, particularly with respect to development. We said you need to do a countywide stream physical assessment and take an inventory of all the streams so that then you could use that to develop watershed management plans, which are really a comprehensive way to manage these watersheds moving forward in a holistic approach, and continue to seek a dedicated funding source, which you saw we had eventually gotten. What's really amazing is all of these recommendations you see in front of us were all satisfied probably within the next 10 years. It was really amazing and a real testament to our leadership and the really strong, really thoughtful leadership that we have in the county to really take care of our resources. So we did this physical stream assessment, walked 800 miles of stream. And it's interesting when you look at the physical assessment, it agreed with the biological assessments we had done in the stream protection strategy. And it's saying about 70% of your streams are in degraded conditions physically. So it was a good correlation between what we had seen biologically, but we also see the physical conditions represent the same amount of streams that are impacted. And again, erosion, sedimentation, and buffer deficiencies were the dominant issues that were noted with this. Now that we had this inventory in place, we could do the watershed management plans because this is kind of the fodder by which we could identify areas for improvement. So let's shift gears a little bit. I talked a lot about history, and I'm sure many of you are saying, this is great, Shannon, this is a wonderful history lesson, but I want to hear about our streams. I want to know what we're learning in our streams and, what's the state of them now? What are we studying? And so I could probably give a semester-long master level college course on just the data analysis and the data collection that we've conducted over the last 20 years. And as I made this presentation, I realized what I really need to do is give everybody a very high level understanding of what we're looking at and some of the lessons we're learning. So I'm going to forgo a lot of the charts and the graphics and the numbers. And I know there are a few people in the audience that are quietly lamenting that and would love to see the data, as I love to see it too. But my focus is going to be really high level lessons learned and work that we're doing. So to do this, I got to kind of quickly go over some of our major watershed monitoring programs. And we have a lot. And really what I want to focus on is these top 3. I could spend a lot of time telling you about these really cool projects that we have, like our lake monitoring, to understand how our lakes work and can we enhance what they do to provide better water quality coming out of them. Or when we go to look at our stormwater outfalls and we find things and how we chase them up the drainage network to find where it's coming from, or the multitude of innovative stormwater BMP performance studies that we've conducted on new types of projects and measuring in and out, and are they treating the way that they're supposed to, and how are they performing over time. But what I'm really going to focus is on are these top 3 programs, which are kind of our biggest ones, and they all include biological monitoring in them because biological monitoring is so important. So we have the annual stream quality monitoring program, and that's basically our annual physical checkup for the county's streams. How are we doing? How many are bad? How many are good? We also have the USGS gauge study, which many of you may have heard of, which is a partnership between us and the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. And it's really a landmark study and a premier urban monitoring program that was really kind of unparalleled at the time we instituted it. And then lastly, our stream restoration monitoring. We're doing a lot of stream restoration now, and the hopes is that we're going to bring back nature and we're going to improve water quality. But if we don't go and monitor it, we're living off assumptions. And if we don't go and look at what we're doing, we don't know how to improve what we're doing. So these three I'm going to kind of focus on, and I see I'm running out of time. So I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker. And many of you may know this, but how do we measure our watersheds? What exactly do we do? And this is the stuff I really dig. I really get into because we get our boots wet. We measure the physical habitat conditions of the stream. We look at bacteria in the streams because that's a pollutant. We look at the community of the fish community and the benthic macroinvertebrates, which are the invertebrates that live in the stream and depend on stream health and quality for their life cycles. And by looking at the biological parts, rather than just the water chemistry, we get a much bigger picture of what's happening on the stream as a whole. We also do, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This
That's
is
fine.
Laura. I just wanted to share with you, I don't want you to feel rushed through trying to get through these remaining slides. And I want to let folks know if they do need to jump off that this is being recorded. And so you're not going to miss anything. Certainly continue to have your questions come in and we'll answer them either as we're going along or at the end of the program. But Shannon, please take your time. This is fascinating information. We really appreciate your sharing it.
Okay, I appreciate that, Laura. That helps me kind of settle down a little bit. And I'm still not going to take another hour. But I also want to not rush through because this is a lot of information. And I think some of it, at least everybody's going to find some part of it interesting, hopefully. So this is how we look at the health of our watersheds. We take a lot of different elements of the stream and we kind of roll them together to look at more holistically. Back in the past, it was grab a water sample, look at the water chemistry, and what does it look like? Well, that only tells us at that one point in time. It doesn't tell us if 10,000 gallons of gas flowed by this point yesterday and killed everything. Whereas if we look at the biology, it really gives us a cumulative impacts and effects indicator of what's going on in the stream. So we get out there and various times of the year, we collect all of these different data points. And it's really why I started in this profession. I really wanted to get out in the environment. I wanted to study it. I wanted to get my hands wet. And this is really my passion, although I've been promoted up into an office now and I just basically sneak out when I can. But I oversee these programs that we help to develop, and they're kind of my pride and joy. And I think the county should be really, really proud of what they've built under these programs. So we call this comprehensive biological monitoring because we're not just looking at one particular element. We're looking at kind of all of the indicators of the ecosystem, the chemistry of the stream, the physical habitat that the critters have to live in, the abiotic factors of our streams that support life in the streams and around the streams. And then also just the biological components, the fish that live there. We know that if there's a lot of impacts, we're going to lose a lot of sensitive species and we'll only be left with very tolerant species, and we will lose species diversity. And we can look at these assemblages of fish and benthic macroinvertebrates, and we can infer from their composition what's happening to the stream. So it gives us a lot of insight. It's a very powerful tool. And biological monitoring is a core element of our major monitoring programs for that reason. So we do well over 100 sites every year across these different programs. And what you see here is a typical year. This map is a typical year of monitoring that we do where we collect benthic samples. The different colors of the dots represent different programs that they're collected for. And you'll see blue dots that are outside the county and probably one white. And the fundamental reason, the premise that this biological monitoring is based upon is that you look at a high quality reference condition, a least disturbed site. On the East Coast, there's very few sites, there's no sites that are pristine. no such thing as pristine on the East Coast because humans have been here for too long, wreaking havoc. So we go to the least disturbed conditions we can find and say, this is as good as you can get in this day and age. And that is our benchmark. We say, that's an A. If you're this good, if your biological community looks like this, you've got an A, and you're going to get 100% or 90%. And so those are our reference sites. And that's what we kind of mark everybody else against within the county, all the other sites. And that gives us our relative health index. So it's really important every year that we not only do our county sites, but we have to do reference sites to give us that that perspective of what is attainable. So this is a really big part of our program. As you can see, we will go in with buckets and nets. We'll grab the bugs. We preserve them. We take them to the lab. We sort through all the leaves and debris and process them. And then we put them under microscopes and we look at their mouth parts and their feet and their antenna and all their different pieces to determine, taxonomically where they fall, what genus or what species they may be. The fish are a little luckier. And again, being a fisherman, this is far and away the most fun part of my job is when I get to join the fish crews. We go out there, we use electricity and we shock the fish. They get stunned temporarily. We scoop them up. And as you can see, there's some stream minnows in this picture here in the bottom right. We scoop them up, we put them in a bucket, we get them out of the electric field, and we continue doing that through our reach. When we're done with the reach, we pull the fish out, we identify them to species, and then we turn them loose because they were only temporarily stunned. So the fish fare far better than our benthic macroinvertebrates, which we have to pickle in ethanol and take to the lab and process. But this is a really critical part of our program, and it's also really fun to get outside. We also do bacteria monitoring, as I noted. And if we find really high E. coli at a site, we then intensify, we double down, we go back and we systematically sample for E. coli around all the tributaries and isolate where it's coming from. And we chase it up the network until we find the source. And typically that is a ruptured wastewater line. And a lot of times these wastewater lines are way out in the middle of the woods. A tree fell and it broke a sanitary sewer pipe, and that sewer pipe is discharging into the stream. And no one knows about it because it's in the middle of the woods. Well, fortunately, this program allows us to catch those and get them fixed. And it's been very successful in that respect. So, what do we do with this data? What does this data mean? So it's our annual health checkup, like I told you. So we pick 40 sites, and every year we choose new sites. And so what this does is it allows us to make statistically valid inferences about the county stream network as a whole. So in other words, last year, all of the county streams together got a score of this. This year, they got a score of that. So we can speak to trends over time about the county network as a whole unit. But what we can't do is we can't look at one stream or one watershed and say, this stream behind your house got worse over this time period, because we're lumping them all together and looking at them in aggregate. And so what we produce every year, if you look down at this pie chart, is how many fall into the different categories of stream condition. And again, you're going to see this looks a lot like the pie chart I showed you that we created in 2001, which was about 3/4 of our streams are falling into the fair, poor, or very poor condition. And then only, looks like less than 20% are really considered really good streams. And those are probably the ones that have 5-acre lots on them and lots of trees. So we use this as a tool over time, and we can look at trends over time on the county as a whole. So what we do is we take all 40 sites, we aggregate them into one, we kind of dumb them down and simplify them into one number, and that's called our stream quality index. And that number is represented here on this simplified graph. And those blue dots are basically each year we take the good, the bad, the ugly, we mush them all together into an average number. And that kind of gives us the pulse of the streams for that year. And what you see over the past 16 years that we've been applying the statistical program of site selection is that there's a lot of interannual variability, and we don't seem to be changing that much, especially as you get in past 2012. We really are we're kind of hovering around a mean there. So if we had a score of 5, that would mean every stream in Fairfax County is as good as our reference conditions in a completely forested park. And if it was a 1, that means that every stream in the county is pretty much dead and only supports aquatic, the really tolerant things like, worms living in the sediments. So as you can see, we're kind of in the middle, and what we're really trying to do is push that thing forward. And if you look at that red line, it is a not statistically significant increase in our annual score. So what we find is there is a very minor increase in our stream quality index over time. However, to our chagrin and dismay, it is not yet statistically significant. Over time, we expect to see more solid statistical significance behind that. We see that, as you noted in the chart, interannual variability is to be expected. And this is an important thing, because if you take just one measurement of a stream and you say that's, well, I'll get into that later, but we know that it changes year in and year out. And we know that if you collect a sample in the spring versus collecting a sample in the fall, you're going to get big differences. And so we need to be aware of these things when we're using this information to make decisions. It's absolutely imperative that we continue to do this work, because without a long-term data set, we really can't confidently assert any trends and make any informed decisions about what to do. Some other interesting things we found with regard to chemistry collected in this program is that specific conductance, many of you may be familiar with this, it is a measure of how electrically conductive water is. And if I took a glass of water and measured specific conductance out of the tap, it'd be fairly low. And if I took a bunch of table salt and I poured the table salt into that water, salt is an electrolyte, and you would have a much higher conductivity in that water. So the ions allow electricity to move through the water with less resistance. So specific conductance can sometimes be a really good surrogate for salt that is in our streams, or other ions. It doesn't necessarily need to be table salt, sodium chloride, it could be other things, but it has to do with dissolved ions in our water. And what we find when we measure specific conductance across all these years is that we see the Triassic Basin has much higher specific conductance. And if you remember, that's the area in the county that is in the western portion, and that was the part that was the ancient lake basin. And what we found is that those are ancient lake bed sediments, and a lot of the heavier minerals that settled out of that lake and onto the lake floor are now being eroded by the streams. And so we're getting a lot of ions in our water there. And that's through no fault of human beings other than the erosion. That's just a natural geological byproduct. We also see, which is a little bit more our fault, is that specific conductance in our streams is increasing countywide, and that's disturbing. We also see that the specific conductance is highest in those areas that have the most pavement. And so that starts to point us towards, more pavement, more salt, wonder where that's coming from. And we also see that in these areas that have more impervious cover, we see the specific conductance increasing at greater rates over time than the areas with less specific conductance. So in other words, we're seeing increases throughout the county over time in the specific, in the salinity of water more rapidly over time. And so that's alarming. And pretty much probably the culprit is road salts and de-icing agents used on our roadways, on our sidewalks, our pavements, both by private and public entities. And there's a large effort underway to try to better manage our salts, and it's called the SAM strategy. And we are a huge part of it. I don't want to get into that too much, but it's a salt management reduction multi-agency effort to try to say, hey, we need to get a handle on our streams getting saltier, because as all of you know, salt kills. It disrupts osmotic balance in organisms at the cellular level, and it can wreak havoc on systems, and entire civilizations have been wiped out because the earth got too salty to farm. So there's a lot of work being done on salt right now. And we really think that, maybe the reason why we're seeing suppressed biology isn't just from erosion. Maybe it's the water chemistry from the salt on our landscape. As we build more roads, that's more areas that we have to salt when it snows. The other interesting thing is that we found the Triassic Basin biological communities were very much different than those next door in the Piedmont. And while I already noted this before, this is not necessarily recognized at larger assessment scales that the state and the EPA do when they conduct their assessments. So we've made a concerted effort to reach out to EPA and the states and say, look, you guys need to know that this is a special little area here. And if you get different scores here, it doesn't mean that it's due to human impacts. It means that the natural conditions there are much, much different. And we've brought a lot of our data to bear to show that to the state and the EPA, and they've really taken notice of it, which is a really good benefit, because we could be hamstrung, we could be punished for having poor water quality conditions when it's really a natural effect. And it's important, if we didn't study this, we wouldn't know that. So that's the annual stream health checkup. And again, that tells us the county as a whole, how are the streams, but we can't tell at one point in the county how that's done over time. So we need a trend monitoring study, and that's exactly what the USGS Stream Gauge Partnership Study is. So why are we doing the USGS study? We established it in 2017 with the Geological Survey, and many of you are familiar. There is the national headquarters in Reston, but the group that we're working with on this project are actually the Virginia Science Center, which is down in Richmond. And every state has a water science center. So those are the guys we work with. We knew the Chesapeake Bay was coming, and they were going to mandate reduction of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. We knew it. We saw the writing on the wall. And we knew that there across the watershed, across the Bay watershed, there were going to be billions of dollars dumped into efforts to remove these nutrient and sediment from surface waters. And we knew that Fairfax County was going to be investing significant dollars in stream restorations and stormwater retrofits to see what we were getting for our money. We anticipated this, and we said, you know what, everything's modeled at the Bay level, but we really don't know what's going on at the local level, and we're going to be spending a lot of time and effort. Let's find out what actually is happening in response to the work that we're going to be doing in these watersheds. And what are we getting for our implementation dollars? Because there are certain models that say if you restore 5 feet of stream, you reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment by this much. And those are empiric. Those are just flat out. These are the rates you get, and they're based on some very limited studies. And we really wanted to see what's the reality. What's the reality check with all the stuff we're going to be doing? We needed real data to validate the Chesapeake Bay models and a lot of the loading assumptions that were about to be imposed on everybody in the watershed. So that was kind of the impetus to do this. We also needed a trend study to look at fixed sites over time, as opposed to moving around the county every year like we did with our previous study that we're doing. So what is it that we do with the USGS network? The goals, as stated, are we need to generate long-term monitoring data so that we can describe water quality conditions as they currently are, but also over time, what trends are we seeing in water quality, water quantity? In other words, how is the hydrology changing over time? And then really importantly, nutrient and sediment loads and yields each year. And what's really cool about this study is that they are able to calculate at our monitoring points how much phosphorus per acre per year came out of that watershed. That's the yield. Loads are basically how many pounds went by this stream gauge. 700,000 pounds of phosphorus came by this stream gauge last year. And then the yields is how much it's normalized by area. So how much per acre. So that then you can compare different sized watersheds together and say, well, this one had 80 pounds per acre and this one had 800,000 pounds per acre. Well, it allows us to quantify these things, and that feeds into the Chesapeake Bay program quite nicely. The next thing we needed to do once we had that information is look at those trends that we see over time, and look at the trends in all the work we're doing at the watershed and see how they relate. Are we doing a ton of work and we see an immediate change? Or are we doing a ton of work and we see a negative, we see more nutrients coming out of the watershed or more sediment coming out of the watershed? We need to link the two and develop the relationships between the restoration and the stormwater improvements we're doing in the watershed and what we're seeing at these small watershed scales. And from that, we said we're every 5 years, they're going to generate a report. The first 5 years was basically just a characterization. Here's what you have in your streams. Once you get to 10 years, you're able to actually start to statistically develop trends saying it's going up, it's going down. So we were able to do trend analysis starting at 10 years. And then also, like I said, how do these trends relate to the implementation that we're doing on the landscape? And again, there is a enormous amount of information generated by this program. And for those of you that are data geeks that love it, you can really dive in and immerse yourself in it. And I'll show you how in a minute. So how do we do this? We establish what we call stream gauges throughout the county. And what these stream gauges do is they collect information like continuous water quality. We put a probe out there that will measure pH, conductivity, specific conductance, dissolved oxygen, turbidity continuously, and then that sends it up to the eye in the sky, and then we can get on the internet and see that almost in real time. But that's very expensive to do that at 20 sites. That would be extremely cost prohibitive. So what we did is we have a very sophisticated, and you'll see this picture of this gauge house right here at the bottom of the screen. That's one of our full-blown, really intensive 5 sites. And then at 15 sites, we have a much less sophisticated system where we go and collect samples monthly. We measure flow monthly. We collect the benthics each year. And what this does is with the very dense data set we collect at the 5 really intensely monitored sites, we can infer and transfer information to these 15 less intensive sites. And it allows us a lot of analytical power without spending billions of dollars doing this. So this gauge here, this picture, what you see in there, that little gray R2D2 looking thing, he's our water sampler. And when it rains and the stream height exceeds a certain threshold, he sucks up water and keeps it in a refrigerator. We run down there, we grab the samples, we send them to the lab, and we look at all the nutrients and sediment that are going by the gauge every time it rains, because that's when most of those things are moving. And then it also logs and records all of the water quality data that's being measured every 5 minutes. And we also have a continuous flow measure or a stage measurement, which basically looks at stream height. And you can watch it rise and fall as it rains, which is a really valuable tool. So we started with 14 sites in 2007, and we decided we needed to expand it to 20 sites in 2013 to get greater spatial coverage. So we started with 4 of these gauges in 10 of the monthly monitoring locations. In 2013, we added a 5th gauge, and we added 5 more monthly monitoring locations. And you can see the network here. The pink are the less intense monitored sites, which basically is a staff plate and a location to collect samples. The green are the really sophisticated, full-blown monitoring setups that we have a wealth of information at. So what progress have we made since we've established that network? Well, we've been running it since 2007. So we have just an enormous amount of information. The first order of business was to get this data out to the public. The USGS created a project website. It's kind of the hub for everything around this project. If you're interested, the HTML, the link is at the bottom. You see there the hyperlink to get to the project webpage. And this provides the public with access to every single point of data that's collected as part of this study. What's really cool is you can go in there, and so this hydrograph that you see right here, I generated that. I went in there and I said, I want to see the last 30 days of discharge at difficult run gauge, and it spits out this graph. And I can go in there and I can have it spit out in tabular format. So if I'm a grad student and I need a huge table of stream data, I can go spit it out and I can just start digesting that information. If I want a graph for presentation purposes or for analysis, I set the parameters and it spits out a graph for you. So it's a very useful tool, not only for us, but for people that want access to this data, other researchers, which we would welcome folks to grab this data and learn about what we're studying. There are also interactive maps. You can click the maps and you can get data for each of those gauges. And it also has links to all the study publications that we have published, but also historical studies and what we're calling ancillary studies, which is a massive beneficial side effect of this work, and I'll get to that in a second. The other thing that the USGS was able to do was to develop regression models, which basically allows them to, at any point in time, they can look at water chemistry in the stream and say, there's this much nitrogen, sediment, and phosphorus passing by right now. And so it's a really, really powerful predictive and analytical tool that they developed. Not to get too deep into the math there. So the progress we've made is so far we've had 2 publications. In 2014, they did the first 5-year publication, which gives us a basic characterization. And it's some very dense reading. I will tell you, there's a lot of, if you guys, those of you that are familiar with USGS reports, they're not light reading. They're definitely something you gotta put your glasses on and rub your eyes and really get into it, but it's a wealth of information and it's very well done. In 2020, we had 10 years worth of data, so we were able to actually talk about trends. Okay, so are these actually going up or going down? And in 2022, we expect that they're going to say how these trends that we observed in the 10-year report were affected by what we did on the landscape. And that's really the culmination of all this work, is how much effect is all this work we're doing. Fairfax County has basically invested $100 million in water quality improvement projects over the last 10 years. That is a significant investment, and we definitely need to know, is it working, is it not working, and why? So another benefit I mentioned were these ancillary studies. Because the national headquarters for the USGS is in Reston, and because we have a network in their backyard with flow gauging, you can piggyback a plethora of different studies on top of this network, and that's exactly what's happened. And so, like I said, there's actually been 19 different studies that we didn't commission, but they were just able to be done based on the fact that this network exists. And so this is all free information and learning that we've gotten. We've learned about the floodplain dynamics in our watersheds, and we understand more how they work. We learned about groundwater nitrogen, carbon cycling, sediment transport, the nutrient dynamics through our watersheds, greenhouse gas emissions as they relate to floodplains, the pharmaceutical chemicals that are flowing through our streams, and more. So it's been a really kind of a, it's greater than the sum of all its parts. And it really has been a seed bed for scientific investigation and understanding. It's been a phenomenal program. So what are some of the things we learned? We found that there are very few other networks like this, but there's one in Atlanta, and I think there was one somewhere else that was similar enough to compare. What they found is that what they're seeing in Fairfax County is similar to what they're seeing in other urban networks in terms of the pollutants being produced. When you compare these little tiny watersheds to the huge watershed size rivers that they monitor for the Bay model, they found that our pollutant loads were within range, but we were at the very high end of that range. But it's probably because the farther you go in the watershed, the more pollution you have, erosion and sediment you have. As you go to the mouth of a 70,000 square mile river, you don't have as much pollution and runoff and erosion occurring because it's accumulated over across the scales of that network. So in terms of how we're doing, there are varying degrees of watershed changes that we've seen in the trend analysis. Unfortunately, and this is my boss hates to see these numbers, but phosphorus, when you average it across the network, we saw about a 4% per year increase in phosphorus across the network. And so in light of all of the work we've done to reduce phosphorus, we still see increases. So why? What's going on there? Are we taking one step forward with stream restorations and 2 steps back because of climate change? That's stuff we need to figure out. We noticed that high phosphorus corresponded with very wet years and high peak flows, which is no surprise. The more erosion you get, the more phosphorus you get. Nitrogen was a mixed bag. At 7 sites, we saw significant decreases in nitrogen. Woohoo! It's working. But we also saw that at the sites that had the highest nitrogen, they increased. So where they're going down, they're going down well. Where it's going up well. We saw a 2% overall decrease in nitrate across the network, which is a good sign. But when you look at total nitrogen, we didn't see anything significant. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And we're going to have to do more continued monitoring to understand. As we found with our other work that we've done, monitoring Triassic Basin streams are different. Their levels of phosphorus in their base flow are 3 to 4 times that of the other streams. And we know this is due to the lake bed geology that those streams flow through. Looking at Difficult Run, it has a gauge at the mouth of it that's not part of this network, but that has been running since the 50s. They were able to couple that data, and they said nitrogen coming out of Difficult Run has been steadily increasing over the last half a century. And that's not surprising. We've been developing the landscape. We've been installing septic systems throughout the watershed. And we're also seeing that there's more and more water being exported out of that watershed over time. And again, that's not surprising. We're building impervious surfaces. We're creating more runoff and less infiltration. So that's not surprising either, but it's also not good news. And something that was extremely interesting that we did not anticipate is that we found that groundwater is highly influenced by septic systems. And what we found is the higher density of septic systems you have per unit area, the higher the nitrate was in our streams. And so there's a very strong correlation. It's not to say that septic systems are not functioning properly. It's to say that the more septic systems you have in the system, the more it's being exported by the streams. And this is really important when you talk about the Chesapeake Bay TMDL and how do we get a handle on nitrate? Well, maybe we don't do it through stream restorations. Maybe we do it through improving septic treatment technology. We don't want to spin our wheels in one area when we could be making easy choices to improve pollutants in another area. So these are all really kind of useful lessons. Back to specific conductance and stream salinity. This is a big one on our radar. And just like the county's annual monitoring, we see that there's about a 2% per year increase in specific conductance across this network of 20 sites. That means some may be down, but some may be up. And when you average it, we're looking at a 2% increase in specific conductance. So that corroborates what we found in the county's own monitoring. We see that the specific conductance increased at nearly all 20 stations. And we see specific conductance increasing not only in the winter, but we also see it increasing in the non-winter months, like the spring, the summer, and the fall. And this really, unfortunately, suggests that the salts that are getting into our environment are being stored there, and they're slowly being released year round. So we may be coming upon a saturation effect where in the spring, when the rains come and purge the groundwater of all the salt, we're not rinsing all the salt out every year, and we're cumulatively increasing the salts that are being stored in our groundwater and on our landscape, and we're not flushing them out every year over time. So this is a disturbing finding, and it's something that we can really work towards in terms of trying to manage. It's important to use this information for management decisions. Our floodplains, really good news. Our floodplains are processing huge amounts of sediment and nutrients. And these are massively valuable ecosystem services. So the more we protect our floodplains, the more that we reconnect our streams and hydrologically connect them to their floodplains, we're going to get massive benefits by letting Mother Nature clean the water the way that she did before we started putting pollutants in it. So this is a confirmation that we really need to be protecting, managing, and designing floodplain considerations in our projects. Unfortunately, this would be no surprise to anybody, but our annual stream temperatures are rising. Unfortunately, it's the inconvenient truth. And we're assuming that's not just to climate change, but also to urbanization. You cut down trees, you put down pavement, you're going to increase water temperatures. Many of our organisms living in the streams are sensitive to temperature changes. So this affects the biology. It also affects the stream chemistry, which in turn affects the biology. So it's kind of like a snowballing effect. Another good piece of news that we saw over this 10-year period is that our biological scores improved. Woohoo, that's great. So why is that? We looked at biodiversity We determined that the biodiversity function and the condition of our streams as a whole are improving. But when we dug in and said, well, how is the biology improving and why is it improving? And what we found out is that we're seeing more and more diversity. Yay, that's great. But the diversity is in those organisms that are tolerant to urban pollution, such as, you know, warmer water, salt, nutrients, these kind of things. So it's like, what's a good metaphor for this? We're seeing more diversity in our streams, but they're not the sensitive organisms that we want to see. So it's like you made improvement, but you really didn't see massive changes. But maybe this is what is the best that can be expected in these streams and in these systems. We're not going to expect to see a pristine type of benthic community in a stream that drains Tyson's Corner. So what can we expect? You know, what's realistic? And so this takes us into the third and final portion of my presentation, and I'm working on an hour and a half here, and I apologize, everybody. But real quickly, it's really important that we're spending a ton of time and energy and money on quote unquote restoring these ecosystems. What is it doing? Are we improving water quality? Are we improving habitat? Are we reducing nutrients? Are we seeing biological lift where the communities come back? So what you see in this before picture is it's kind of a mess. The streams are eroded and there's tons of sediment, but you have very diverse habitat in a lot of different places for the critters to live. After we come in and we humans engineer nature, which is always very, kind of makes me want to just kind of cover my face, but it's the best we can do. We're really trying to use natural channel design to mimic natural processes, and it's evolving over time, and it's always getting better. But what you see is very stable channel. We don't have erosion. We don't have all the sediment and nutrients coming out of the banks. But we also don't have is really nice looking natural habitat. We have very uniform, homogeneous habitat. So we've got to continue to look at before and after we do these restorations. What is it telling us? So what we do is we have a huge matrix across, starting in 2012, I think we started, and we've got to project it out to like 2030. We're going to go to these sites that we're restoring and look at them several years before we restore them and many years after we restore them to understand the water quality, the benthic macroinvertebrates, the habitat, the nutrients, what's working, what's not. If we see the bugs come back, yay, great. Why is that? So that's the idea behind this program. And really, again, unfortunately, with all of our programs, there are all these kind of wait and see things. We can't give you a quick, here's your answer after 2 years of data. It's really, we need to do these for long periods of time to really make critically informed decisions. What we have seen from this is kind of a mixed bag. We've seen some streams that look really good after restoration, and we see some streams that actually look worse after restoration. And then we've seen streams that go up and down and up and down and up and down after restoration. And so we're not seeing consistent results across all of our restoration sites. And so it really requires a lot more years of looking. This is an interesting thing I just wanted to share with you guys as an example of the extremely innovative programs that we operate. We said, after you restore a stream, can you stock that stream with good critters that weren't there before because the stream was degraded? Can we bring in good bugs, put them in there, and see if they live? And if they don't live, why didn't they live? Was it the water quality is no good? Is there no habitat for them? Can we expedite the biological recovery? So we did this 2-year study. It's a before-after control investigation with a highly rigorous study design to it, so we can statistically answer some of these hypotheses that we have. And we just finished it. We haven't done the data analysis yet. But the really interesting thing is we would take these bags full of debris, which is basically habitat and food for our bugs, and we put them in a really good stream. The bugs colonize the bag. We kidnap them from their wonderful stream habitat. We put them into a stream that we've restored, and we come back over time and we see if they're still there, and we see how they're doing. And if they're not there, or who's there and who isn't there, are they still are they persisting, or did they die off? Why did they die off? So this really allows us to answer a plethora of questions. It'll help us to improve our restoration designs. If we find out that they're not living because they don't have the habitat they need, we can refine the habitat in our stream restoration designs. Or no matter how much we do with that stream reach, the water quality coming from upstream is what's killing everything. And so, these are all things that we need to take into consideration when we shape our expectations of what we really want to see as an endpoint. We found that restoration is very effective at stabilizing the streams. Like I said, some show good signs, some don't show good signs of recovery. So some of the questions we still need to explore is what's stopping the recovery in these restored sites? And is there a realistic ceiling for biological potential in urban systems that we can say, here's a really achievable endpoint, and if we get there, we've done really good. Where is that point? We know that we're not going to get back to pristine conditions. What design practices that we're currently doing are helping or hurting recovery? Is it the type of equipment we're using? Is it the type of habitat we're building? Is it the type of substrate we're putting in the streams? And then a really big question is, how long does it take for these streams to actually come back to their full potential? Some streams it may take 5 years, one stream it may take 2 years, another stream it may take 10 years. So we really need to understand that, especially when we start to judge ourselves and see how well we've done with our restoration work. And then this all feeds back to how do we do better designs? If we're going to go in there and we're going to muck around and we're going to try and make it better, how do we continually inform that process? One last thing. So looking forward, this is the end. I'm going on an hour and a half. And again, for those, probably 5% of you find this fascinating like me, and the other 95% have gone and got coffee and gone to the bathroom a couple times. Looking forward, we need to continue these programs. I think you've heard that throughout my presentation. We can't act on incomplete information. We can start to use this information to inform what we do, but we can't be conclusive about this until it is conclusive. Some of these things that we're starting to see, we need to make sure they're not just a blip on the radar. We started a new, I'm very, very proud of the group that did this. My team started a new stream physical assessment program, and they built it from scratch, all inside the county using GIS technology and mobile collection technology. They developed all of their metrics. They tested all their metrics. They calibrated them. And what they have now is they go out every year and they walk the streams, and they do purely a physical assessment of the stability of the streams. And they have a very sophisticated methodology, but at the end of the day, what you can see is you can look at all of these little sub-watersheds, which are pretty small drainage areas, and you can get a generalized score of what their physical condition is. And when you drill down a little bit further, you can see each individual reach. You can pick up photographs. You can find out where there's a sewer line crossing, or there's a really bad erosion point, or there's a blockage in the stream. And all of this information is being used to identify areas of opportunity for where we may want to go and do stream fixes and improvements, or just stop the bleeding. So we've developed this, and this is being incorporated into our long-term program. It's not necessarily stream monitoring per se in terms of looking at water quality, but it's a continued inventory of what we have, what the conditions are there, and it gives us eyes on the ground to understand where we may need to go and do work next. So it really feeds our stream restoration and our capital program. Looking forward, we need to continue to use adaptive management of the information we learn. As I've alluded to before, if we don't take what we learn and apply it and adapt what we're doing, we'll just keep making the same mistakes. So it's really important that this monitoring data is conveyed to the folks that are doing the management, and we do this regularly, and we interact greatly with a lot of our design engineers and our restoration specialists. So looking forward, what I realized when I wrote this slide is that I have way more questions than I have answers for you guys. And I guess that's the point of science and investigation. First thing I'd like to note is that Fairfax County has some of the most progressive and advanced monitoring and restoration programs in the nation. I've been around a lot of conferences and been around the country and seen what other people are doing, and we have really, truly reason to be proud for what we're doing. It really is a testament to not only the current leadership, but leadership over the past decades in Fairfax County. And everybody that has ever been part of this should be commended for it. It's really something that I'm proud of, and the residents of the county should be proud of. We're actually helping other people understand more about streams as we learn about our own. We're actually able to share that information, and we're contributing to the greater scientific community of knowledge about streams. Something we need to think about moving forward is how do we improve our water quality locally and at the source? And this is a big contention point. We're doing a lot of stream restoration. That really saves a lot of sediment and nutrients and erosion from occurring in the stream. But what happens if the water coming through that is being polluted upstream on the upland in parking lots and people's houses and roadways? We need to think about, as the science advances, how we take a more holistic approach at not just restoring the receiving systems, but as soon as the water hits the ground from rain, how do we protect it? You heard me mention this about what's the realistic recovery endpoint for urban stream systems. We've talked with our regulators at Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and we said, you really can't hold us to a standard that you could hold a stream out in the country, because they can recover. Their biological communities have a much easier path to recovery, whereas if we're draining highly impervious area, there's a limit there, and we can't be held to an impossible standard. And so we've been having a lot of dialogue with our regulators over the years, using our data to say, let's find an agreed upon realistic endpoint. How do we protect or improve our environment when Fairfax County is one of the most rapidly, I don't want to say developing, but redeveloping and modernizing landscapes in the region? We're continuously seeing rezonings, redevelopments, new features on the landscape, and it's outpacing the ability of stormwater management to handle it. And so we're really pushing up against our limits of conventional stormwater management. And so how do we further innovate stormwater management in the county? And everybody across the nation is struggling with this. But those are questions that we have to ask, and we have to monitor and study. And then again, what are the emerging threats to our environment? What is that lurking behind us that we don't even know about, and we wouldn't find out if we didn't monitor? Pharmaceuticals in our waterways is one. You may have heard of PFAS, which are very persistent chemicals in the environment that affect water sources and cause a whole host of very nasty biological side effects, cancer and the like. So we need to, and microplastics, there's another one. What does that mean in our streams? Or is it more of an ocean issue? So we need to be continuously thinking about, not only are we trying to juggle all these balls right now that we know about, what about when someone throws us another ball, and now we've got to juggle that ball and figure out, which one is the most important one to keep in the air, and which one, if we had to drop one, which one would we drop? So it's important to continue to keep all of this in front of us. And lastly, and I underline this and highlight this because in my opinion, this is the most important out of all the stuff I've talked about today, is how do we continue to engage the public on all these issues? Because if the public doesn't know about it, they can't care about it. And if they don't care about it, they can't do anything in their personal lives, through their elected officials, through their children, through their personal choices. So it's really important that they're paying for all this work. And it's really important that we share with them what we're finding, and so they can make decisions on their own personal lives and how they conduct themselves and how they want their environment managed. So that was a lot of stuff, hour and 40 minutes. I apologize for the length of it. I hope some of you guys found some of it interesting. And I'm willing to take questions now if any of you are still left.
And we still have a lot of people on the line. I think we had a total of 71 folks joining us this morning. 72 may have been what I registered at one point. We still have 65 that have stuck with us. So I think you've done a great job. And if you have your chat open, you'll certainly see a lot of accolades coming in your way. So I just, want to, again, thank you, Shannon, on behalf of everyone. while this was a longer presentation, I'm so glad that we've got the time and the space for you to be able to share all of this really important information. So there have been a lot of questions and a lot of comments, a lot of interest in the information that you provided today, Shannon. And for those of you who were following along on the chat, I tried to answer as many as I could, while also trying to put some aside for Shannon to answer. We got to give him the hard questions, So Shannon, I tried to group them as best I could, and I've got probably 5 questions related to data, some related to other monitoring programs and the way that you've integrated them, some questions about personal stewardship, as well as other things that the county may want to be taking into consideration, and then just a little bit of information that's programmatic. So are you ready for some questions?
Wow, I just opened the chat and saw all the comments. So I commend you for wrangling that together into cohesive categories and trying to get everybody's questions answered as much as we can. Yes, I'm ready.
Well, and I'm sure that there may be even some additional questions that are coming in. So we'll do the best to answer what we can, and certainly try not to keep everybody here until 2 o'clock. Answering a lot of these things. And some of these questions may be things that we can't quite answer right now, but we can take back for some consideration. All right, Shannon, let's start off with the data, because you shared a lot of great information and about what's going on in the streams, the kind of information that's being collected. And so a couple of questions related to the biological monitoring and the stream quality index. Are there current IBI ratings? And again, IBI stands for Index of Biotic Integrity. Do you have individual ratings for local stream segments?
We have them for points on our stream. So yes, those 40 sites that you saw, every year, we actually have, for that point, it's actually a 100-meter reach. And so we collect the bugs at that 100-meter reach. But when you zoom out to the county, it's basically a point on the stream. And so, yes, we do have, for the last 16 years, we have those scores for every sample we've collected. I think that's the answer that someone's looking for.
I think that's good. And Shannon, is that information available online?
It is available online, but it's kind of buried in what we call the stormwater status reports, which we did every year for a long period of time, and we still do. So if you go to the DPWS webpage and you go to the stream quality assessment, or if you look under stormwater, you should be able to find stormwater status reports. And in that report, we have a brief section that kind of talks about that stream quality assessment program. I don't know if you're going to be able to say this site that I'm interested, that's in my local park, it got a score of 50. I don't know that we got to that level of detail. And I will tell you that one of my initiatives for my team is to start serving this information up on the web so that anybody interested can go and click on any point in the past 20 years and get that score and some of the data that is along with it. It's a massive undertaking, but I want to connect the data to the people that want to use it. So I guess the answer to the question is go look at the stormwater status reports, see if it has the information that you're seeking. And if it doesn't, you can reach out to me and I'd be happy to provide you with any data that you're interested in.
Wonderful, thank you. And I highly recommend using your favorite search engine to try to find some of these things, because navigating through any governmental website, including our own, can be very challenging. So if you Google stormwater status reports, you should be able to find it. Sorry, somebody just arrived at my door, so my dog is letting me know. Along the same line, Shannon, the Stream Quality Index, there was a comment and an observation that the curve for the first half of the time period, and I apologize, I didn't capture which slide it was. Yep, your sine curve for the first half of the time period. And then it went flat from about 2012 on. And there was a question about, can you explain why it flattened? And was there a change in measurement or regulation that may have flattened that curve? Do you have any understanding of why that might have occurred?
Yeah, we regularly speculate that. We ourselves regularly speculate on that, where you see this, it's still kind of the same, it's still oscillating around the same number, but there's a much higher amplitude. And then as you get farther in time, you see it tightening up. And I think that's what you're describing. I have an employee that I brought on about halfway through that time frame, and he swears that he tightened up the QA/QC on the collection and the protocol, and he says that's why you're getting less variability. We don't know that. It could be we had a historic drought and then a historic deluge within 2 years, as you remember, Laura, when we did perennial streams in the early 2000s. And weather has a very profound effect on the benthic scores because streams dry up or there's more flow bringing more pollutants or more sediment. So we really don't know the answer to that question. We can speculate a lot, but what we do know is even though it was oscillating with a higher amplitude and a higher standard deviation, it was still oscillating around the same median number, if that makes sense. So yes, we had more variance, but it was still around the same basic number, which hasn't changed much in the last 15 years. So I really don't have an answer. I can just speculate.
Yeah, perhaps as more data is collected, we may be able to pull some more inferences out of it.
Right.
Wonderful. Another question came in, again, related to the data. Do you notice the difference in the biological community between the Piedmont and coastal plain regions, and how is that taken into account I guess, as it relates to your IBI?
Yep, and Laura, you know the answer to this. We actually have to have separate IBIs. We have an IBI for the Piedmont, which is a collection of multiple metrics. The Piedmont actually has 10 different metrics that measure different elements of the bug community. And we have a different IBI for the coastal plain because we know the streams are different. And some of the ways they're different is they're flatter. The flatter the streams are, the less turbulence, the less dissolved oxygen. The less dissolved oxygen, you can expect less sensitive species there. So it's not to say a coastal plain stream is bad because it doesn't have sensitive species. It's just not the same as a highly oxygenated mountain stream, so we can't treat it the same. So what we do is we take our two scores, one for the Piedmont and one for the coastal plain, and we scale them both to 100 so then we can compare them apples to apples. And so we have a very distinct line where if your site falls over here, it's Piedmont. If it falls over here, it's coastal plain. And that line is pretty much the fall line. If anybody of you are familiar with the fall line, it's where the Piedmont kind of cascades down and just boom, flattens out into the coastal plain. And that pretty much follows Route 95 down kind of the whole, Virginia, slices of Virginia right down the middle. And that's where all the major cities are, by the way. They brought their ships in from the ocean, and as soon as the flat water stopped and they got to these rocky cascades, they stopped, parked their boats, and built cities. And so Richmond, Petersburg, Washington, Fredericksburg, all of these cities are on that fall line. And that's kind of where we, to the east, we use our coastal plain index, and to the west, we use our Piedmont index. That was more answer than was asked for.
Thanks, Shannon. Always appreciate a lot of good information. Again, as it relates to some of the data, this particular question relates to some of the USGS study on septic systems. And the question is the septic correlation due to leaks and maintenance issues, or is it just their very existence that may be causing the issue? Do you have any information on that?
Yes, I do, and I'm glad you asked that because I alluded to that, but I obviously wasn't really clear, and it was very important when we went and studied this was, is it the presence of septics, or is it that they are failing and their maintenance and their operation? And what we found working with the health department was that by and large, the majority of all those septic systems were working the way they were supposed to. It was purely the density of these septic fields. So the more and more and more septic fields you had per, let's say, square acre, the more loading of nitrogen you had. And so it's not to say that all of the septic fields are failing and we need to do something about it. Really what it is, it's old technology. And septic systems basically sort out all the solids and get out the phosphorus, and all the nitrate-rich water still gets through because now we have more advanced septic systems and they do nitrate treatment, but the ones that we're all familiar with really don't do anything in the way of nitrate. And so again, to answer the question, it's not from the failure of maintenance or operation of these septic systems. It's just the pure density of those. And as we found, there were more and more per square, whatever, per area, we found much higher values of nitrate getting to the streams.
Interesting stuff for sure. And there is a lot of new technology trying to remove nitrogen again and nitrates from those systems. One more question as it relates to data. There was an observation that was made in regards to the fact that the majority, what was perceived as the majority of the biological monitoring sites seem to be in the northern part of the county. Can you explain a little bit more? I think you discussed a little bit about the randomization of some of your site selection, but can you describe why there might be a little bit higher of a number of monitoring locations in the northern part of the county versus the southern?
That was just purely an artifact of the year I grabbed. So every year we shuffle the deck again and they get randomly selected. So the image that you guys saw was just for 1 year. And yes, maybe 1 year they're heavily loaded to the north, and maybe the next year they're heavily loaded to the east. But by having it random every year, we basically are able to average out. For those that are statisticians, this is a probabilistic monitoring program, which has a stratified random framework, which means we take the streams and we break them into categories, and then we select in those categories. So we have stratified our streams by stream order. Tiny streams are first order streams. The next size streams are second order streams, all the way to fifth order streams. So what we do is we break our streams into classes, and then we randomly assign a number of sites in each of those classes. If you think about a tree has a million tiny little twigs, and the wood in those twigs is actually more than the wood in the trunk. And so our streams are the same way. We have way more streams that are small first order streams. So the majority of our sites are weighted towards the first order streams. And as we get to the larger and larger streams, we have very few sites on the big streams because they don't make up a large portion of the total network. But to answer the question is, every year it's a random, statistically valid random grab, and we don't have a skew towards the north. And by the very nature of this statistic approach, it allows us comfort knowing that no matter where they land each year, we should average out.
Great, thanks, Shannon. This next question, I'm trying to compile two questions into one here, and it relates to some of the other monitoring programs or perhaps some of the other efforts that you may have going on. Can you talk a little bit about any estuarine related monitoring that you might do? So we talked a lot about the stream physical assessments and things that may be occurring in non-tidal portions of the stream. So these tidal areas of our stream sections as they get closer to the Potomac River. Can you talk about if there's any efforts that you may be doing or that other organizations that you may be familiar with? And then to kind of piggyback on that, can you talk a little bit about how you might utilize any of the Salt Watch program? That's a program through the Isaac Walton League, and it's a volunteer program essentially to collect data on salinity within the water. How you use that in terms of the perhaps the SAMS effort.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with that, and it has been part of our SAMS work. I'm a member on the monitoring work group subcommittee of SAMS. SAMS split up into multiple committees. One of their committees is a monitoring subwork group, and we actually have used that data, the public data, the citizen data, just like you guys have your Save Our Stream, or Isaac Walton has Save Our Streams, and you guys do the citizen monitoring for Benthics. It's a really valuable supplement. So it fills in all these little data gaps that we may not have around our network. So although it's not high quality, analytical laboratory derived data, it still is really helpful to kind of fill in gaps. And so it was used as part of the salt management strategy. And part of our write-up said this, we made recommendations, and we recommended continuing use and getting more of the public to actually go and grab those samples to use for ongoing salt, because this is going to be something we're going to be dealing with for a long time. And the more the public can help, that means the governments don't have to go at it alone with their own resources, and it becomes a collective effort. So that Salt Watch stuff is really going to be valuable as a supplemental data source. The first part of the question was about tidal estuarine monitoring, and what I can say, our programs are all in the non-tidal free-flowing portions of streams in the county, which is most of the network. Really, the only places where we have the tidal are right at that interface with the tidal Potomac. And probably the best thing I could recommend, I don't know of any active monitoring programs other than the Department of Environmental Quality. Virginia DEQ is required to monitor not only our streams, but our estuarine and tidal embayment. So they have a monitoring program that looks at those areas, but they're typically out into the big estuaries like Pohick, Gunston Cove, Occoquan Bay, some of the really, really big areas when you're right next to the Potomac. But when I hear tidal and estuarine monitoring, immediately I think of Gunston Cove. That is that 30-year study in the tidal embayment where Pohick Creek and Accotink Creek all flow together and meet with the tidal Potomac. It's a very productive estuary. A lot of fish utilize that in the spring when they come in and they spawn. And our sewer treatment plant drains to that. So they've been studying that with GMU through the Gunston Cove study. And I would highly encourage you to familiarize yourself with that study. If you ever have a chance, either to have Chris Jones come talk to you guys here or go see one of his talks, it's really fascinating, that ecosystem study that they've done. And that's a tidal embayment. But in terms of what we do in the county, the tidal areas are such a super, super tiny amount of our total network, and they require such specialized equipment like boats that we just don't monitor them because, you know, it's much easier to walk in a stream that you can keep your footing in and it's at your ankles. Hopefully that answered the question.
I think that there's some interest in further understanding some of the implications of water quality in those estuarine sections. So, and certainly some of the other activities through George Mason University, they are doing quite a bit of research on microplastics. So cool. There's a tremendous amount of effort that's happening to understand what the water quality impacts are. And just as Shannon was referring a little bit, the pollutants that are being observed, whether it's microplastics or whether it's, you know, pharmaceuticals, salt, these are all emerging issues that there's a lot of groups, including our drinking water authorities, that are looking into pretty heavily. So Shannon mentioned he could do a whole master's course on this, and I think we could probably, you know, do a tremendous amount of several different semesters worth of information on the monitoring that's happening here in Northern Virginia. We should be really proud that all of that is taking place. Shannon, a couple of questions that relate to stewardship and some of those folks that are actually doing a lot of voluntary stormwater management on their property. I'm not sure that this is a question that you could particularly answer, but maybe it's something that we can take back and all, is that there's interest in understanding whether or not there's work in the way of providing any sort of refund for stormwater service tax and that fee for those that are capturing their stormwater management on site. I'm not sure if that's something you could answer right now.
I can tell you right now, I've never heard of conversations around that, but this is not a concept that's foreign, because when you talk about stormwater management utilities, which is a different way of structuring what we have our funding around, they provide credits for, yes, if you have more impervious surface under a stormwater management utility, you actually have to pay more. Whereas what we run is basically based on the value of your house. Regardless if you have paved all 5 acres or you have forest for all 5 acres, everybody kind of pays the same. To move to a utility, which is extremely much more burdensome to administer, but it can, what they do is they look at your house and say, well, Harry Glasgow has 3 acres of imperviousness. We're going to charge him a lot more money. And we'll say, Laura, great, boy, she's only got like 1 driveway that's 1/4 of an acre, and she's got BMPs and all kinds of handmade stuff around her house. We're going to give her credits against her fee. So the way that we're set up right now, we really don't have the mechanism to do that. But I think we have looked at ways of providing funds, and probably in cooperation with the Soil and Water Conservation District. We know DC has done this. I think Arlington's done it, is where they provide incentive and funds for landowners to do stormwater management on their properties and then not have an out-of-pocket cost. So it's not to say that you would get a refund on your stormwater management tax bill, but you could put facilities in on your property or do management on your property by being supported by a fund. So it's not really the same thing. I haven't heard discussions about credits to the stormwater service district, but I think it's a great idea. And I think that would encourage a lot more people to get involved with personally managing their own sites. I think it's a wonderful idea.
I think we definitely, with the conservation assistance program, we have some great support from the county in terms of being able to assist property owners and homeowners associations, places of worship, and different institutions like that with taking a look at their stormwater management and identifying voluntary opportunities. And through the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, we're able to also support private residents and being able to resolve erosion and drainage concerns on their propities as well. So
I'll tell you what,
lots of information.
I'll float that idea up to my big boss and see what reaction I get. I'd be very interested because I haven't heard conversations around it, but it's a really interesting idea. And so I'll see what comes of it once I plant a seed.
We can't make any promises,
No.
but ideas are always welcome for sure.
Right.
All right, Shannon, we've got just a couple more questions left, and then I know if we sat here long enough, we would have a tremendous number of additional questions that come in. Shannon did share his email address, so I do encourage you to follow up with him, and we'll include it in the chat as well before we head off. So if we didn't get to your question or you've got follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with Shannon. There is the big question, Shannon, about how the Stormwater Planning Division is responding to some of the more recent concerns that have been raised about natural channel design, stormwater management, stream restoration techniques, particularly in more older growth forests that we have, or really forests that have not been touched really within the last 50 to 75 years. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, and we've been having a lot of internal discussions about it too. So it's a big topic to talk about. I'm going to try and compress it really quickly. There is a few very vocal opponent critics, and they're extremely vocal, and they oppose stream restoration. And as far as we can tell, it's primarily driven by tree loss. People really get affected by tree loss, and it really has an impact on people when they see mature trees coming down, and especially if it's in their backyard or their favorite park. And to be honest, when we first started stream restoration projects 10 to 15 years ago, there were some pretty heavy casualties to the trees because it was all new, and we had construction workers who had never done ecological restoration coming into stream valleys and building nature. So to their point, there was a lot of tree damage. For example, the stream bank in Reston, when they first got started and started doing the stream bank in Reston, there was a heavy casualties to trees, and the public really got up in arms about it. And over the period of time that they worked there, they really got better with their techniques. We have urban foresters that we go out, we mark all the major trees. We do minimization and avoidance of trees as much as we possibly can. But primarily the focus of the groups that are opposing this are really opposed based on the tree loss and the terrestrial impacts. My personal view of this is I love trees. I hate to see trees go, but trees grow back. Maybe not in our lifetime. Trees grow back. Streams do not heal themselves. And as a stream continues to cut and cut and cut and continuously get worse, it's not going to heal itself until it's ripped out half of the sediment in the floodplain and gotten it out of its way. And all that sediment goes to our streams, our lakes, the bay. So we have to have some degree of intervention in these streams to get the streams up and into their floodplains. And there is a necessary degree of tree loss that occurs with that, although we can continuously get better. In my discussions with folks in our agency who have been hearing these complaints, these groups are providing some information that's true and some information that is not true. And so we are working with our partners in other jurisdictions to put out some fact sheets about what we do, how we do it. I can tell you, we have a slew of ecologists that work with the engineers and stream restoration design folks that are heavily involved with do no harm or minimize the amount of harm that we do. So what good would it be to restore a stream if you did more damage than good, right? So we are putting together fact sheets and information for the public so that they can have unbiased information. And we're still willing to learn. We're not saying we're 100% right. We want to learn and we want to get better. But we also want the public to have good, solid information and facts in front of them. But typically, yeah, I guess this all comes back to tree loss. Again, my personal opinion is you can leave that tree, but that stream is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and never get better. Whereas if we have to take out a few trees, improve the stream, and we do heavy native replantings, and we have warranties on our replantings, and we go back and check them for multiple years to make sure that that they're successful. We have success rate criteria, and that the invasive hasn't taken over. So we're actually building the future of the forest where we impact it. So I think I'll just stop there. But yeah, just when you hear, make sure you have good information that you're working on, because everybody presenting information has a certain angle.
Great, thank you, Shannon. I think we're going to end it there with that.
It's going to be a green lunch
statement. Yeah, it's about that time to go warm up everybody's soup for lunchtime. Everybody's coffee, if you had any left. It's now cold, but just really, Shannon, thank you so much. This is, I think you're a great representative for Fairfax County and the work that y'all are doing for the stream monitoring program, watershed monitoring program. And it's so much more than just collecting, just the biological information as you shared. It's very, very comprehensive. And not only are you doing wonderful things for Fairfax County here, but you're doing tremendous leadership and modeling for, the nation. So thank you all very, very much. Thanks to you and your team for the work that you're doing. There's a lot of claps taking place that we see. So again, wonderful presentation. For those of you who stuck with us, we still have 45 folks that are on the line, 44, 43. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. We look forward to seeing you again in May. Stay tuned for information on that program. But again, we're so glad that you were able to join us. Continue to be wonderful stewards, continue learning, continue expanding, and continue to ask questions. Because that's what helps us to better understand what we need to do. And it helps to set up programs just like what Shannon is doing. So his email address is in the chat box, so you can go and send all your hard questions to Shannon over the course of the next week. But again, thank you all very, very much. We will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good job there, Shannon. Good to see you.
Thanks, Harry.
Again.
Thank you all for putting up.
You can come off mute and thank Shannon.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thanks for caring. Thanks for hanging in there and listening to all the information, and keep doing all the good work that you guys do.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks so much, Shannon.
Thank you, Laura.
Great job.